Right. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this 73rd episode of Retuning Your Firm. And I'm delighted to be with you again today and with four amazing guests and panelists that you'll be hearing from very shortly. Let's just look at what are today's themes, and you'll have got the obviously slide in front of you. So we're going to be looking at the deal. We're going to be looking at what is it that firms need to be doing in order to make sure they meet needs of their people in an environment, if you like, a contract, where the conditions have possibly fundamentally changed. But that doesn't mean to say you don't need to find a new one. I shall avoid using the word normal yet. I think that's a bit premature. We're going to look at the world of property, not the whole of the world of property. We're going to look at what are some of the issues which managing partners, the audience today, need to be thinking about in the context of property, and not just for themselves as a firm, but possibly the impact of property on their people too. And we're going to look at careers, and we're going to look at people and what do the individual frontline advisors feel, because at the end of the day, you can't have a deal unless you look at it from both sides. It doesn't. The win-win is absolutely essential. So over to me, and I'm Richard Chaplin, and very happy to be with you today for the first of these. I was going to say summer. It just feels like summer today. It's just amazing weather. So hopefully that's true for all of you as well. So let's go on with it. Now, who are we going to be talking to today? I'd like to introduce you to Susie Pugsley, who is the, as she puts it, founder, managing director, and consultant all in one at PSBD. I think I've got the acronym right. And she's going to be talking about the contribution from marketing, excuse me, and what can marketing contribute on the management team? Because all too often, marketing, if not absent, is expected to go and communicate the outcome of the management team, not actually contribute to the thinking behind where they got to. So welcome, Susie. Looking forward to hearing from you shortly. Devyani Vaishampayan, I think I pronounced that correctly. Forgive me if I've got it wrong. Oh, sounds good. Okay. And she is the managing partner of the HRTech partnership, has a very distinguished career and 8 senior HR roles on major blue chips. And she set up a business to really start looking at how could she help the HR community around the soft issues, particularly around technology and the softer issues of leadership, etc. So really looking forward to hear your thoughts. And her theme today is to help looking, what is it that HR, and if you think marketing isn't on the board, believe me, HR is even less likely to be on the board. Devyani is one of the few who has been at that level, so can, I think, give some authoritative input as to what does that actually mean in practice if you had such a person on your board as the leader for today. Our third panelist today is Jonathan Macfarlane. Welcome, Jonathan. And he is the director at an organization many of you will probably have come across, the Professional Career Partnership. It certainly says what it does on the tin. I don't think I need to describe its role. But he does a huge amount of coaching, career mentoring, and all those appropriate words in helping particularly legal, but not exclusively, sector, and therefore has a very privileged insight as to what are the issues that are actually going on in the minds of particularly the frontline advisors, though I'm sure some of the business management people come talk to him as well. And welcome, Jonathan. Our final, our final panelist today is Chris Blythe, OBE. And that was for modern slavery, as it happens. So it's a very different cause for most reason. But he is the non-executive chairman and a NED. And he had 20 years running, I think, a very well-known, respected professional body in the area of property and construction, and has kept very much in touch with that world since his retirement a few years ago. So, Chris, welcome to the show, and looking forward to your thoughts a little bit later. So, me again. What are we going to be doing today? Well, I wanted to kind of just, first of all, just do a little bit of forum news, actually keep up with what's going on in the forum. First point I'd make is that lots and lots of people, which is great, are watching the videos from the past shows. So please don't miss out on those. There's literally hundreds of them. And I mean, one of the people last week, they've had well over 100 people watch their videos since it went live on YouTube. So definitely getting a great audience. For those interested in our peer groups, we've had a lot of people who've looked at our unlisted, you have to ask for it, peer group video, which kind of express what is it like to be on a peer group. On the Mentor Match program, 85% of the people who have signed up as mentees have now been matched, and well over 50%, I think 60% are actually now in mentorships. One person has actually decided they need 3 mentors, which I thought was quite greedy, but seemed to work for all the parties involved, so fair enough. And for those of you who aren't familiar with it, it's not just about the selection, which is where the algorithm helps. It's also about a platform in which people can then track the mentorship all the way through. And after 6 months, have to score the other person as to how effective they were as a mentor or a mentee, which in turn then feeds back into future selection. So very much a feedback loop we've set up there. Excuse me. The last area I just wanted to cover was the Forum Innovation Summit, which is taking place in a couple of weeks' time. And we've got a really interesting, I call it a pirandello, play within a play. So you'll be watching a board grappling with very much the same issue we had today. Very interesting board, probably slightly stereotyped in terms of their contributions. They'll be working with Miro templates, and the whole thing will be in the remote networking environment, which is as good as you'll get, I think, in reality to face-to-face. So those are my few forum news. Moving on. Let's just see, what am I going to say? Well, first of all, feedback from UK government. We're talking about polls. If you recall this section of the community of the show, we tend to look at polls, and we know from government those polls are incredibly valuable, which is kind of nice of you. So before we go on to this week's poll, just wanted to kind of give you the quick feedback from last week's poll. And if you recall, or 2 weeks ago, sorry, 22nd of April, and we looked at the whole area of pricing and pricing maturity. Now, I think the point that came across to me, there was a bit of a surprise, was that external advocacy for the firm's pricing strategy remained surprisingly high. And that was despite, well, first of all, partner intuition appearing to be the main driver for pricing decisions, and that can be good, but it can be very suboptimal, as we know. Secondly, that about between 50 and 60% of firms were not training their partners in at least 8 hours of pricing skills, and their associates in at least 5 hours of pricing skills. And I think that was one of the points that was made last week was, hey, maybe we should be reviewing that, because if you are looking at costs and costs are going in the wrong direction, then looking at your revenues and pricing is actually really important, because otherwise you will end up with very bumpy pep. Partners don't like that. Very few partners appear to have presenters as having high levels of financial literacy and awareness. Again, it's probably linked to the training issue. If you're not trained somebody, they may not have it. But if you, it's clearly an issue, because if people are financially, I won't say illiterate, but if they're not as high financial literacy as they could be, that's obviously not ideal. Pricing governance, that's the whole area, the way in which government pricing is organized, remains, I think the word I came up with is patchy. Very few firms really have a clear policy, and levels of compliance are not as high as we would like, maybe cobble issues, but and that applies as much to accountancy firms as law firms, you'd be surprised to hear. And again, we all love our spreadsheets, don't we? Spreadsheets are seen as fine, and there are some really quite sophisticated pricing specific technologies out there, but very, very few firms are using them. So I'll just show you a few charts which come out of the thing we did. So which of these phrases best describes the way that you would speak externally about your firm's pricing strategy? Again, you probably can't see the bit at the bottom, so apologies for that. But over to the right is, I would speak highly without being asked. They're the people you really want to have on your team. Over to the left, and luckily there aren't any of those, are the saboteurs. I would be critical without being asked. Then the two either side of that are if you were asked. So on to a little bit around about 10% saying I would be critical if I were asked. And about 30 to 40%. The two colors, the blue was this month, 2 weeks ago. The red was the 23rd of October, 2020. So about 18 months ago. Not that many changes, I suspect, is the simple answer. And the big chunk were neutral. That was around about 50, 55% were neutral. Well, in English, neutral can mean lots of things. It doesn't normally mean positive, though. Second chart, again, I'll quickly run through it. How much the pricing that occurs is predominantly based on intuition, and that's the big chunk at the bottom. How much is very data driven? Effectively nothing at the top, and the ones in between, it's used quite extensively, and some data is used, but it's mainly partner intuition. In terms of awareness, there's a little bit at the right, high levels of financial literacy, 10, 20%, something like that, depending on when it was done. Big chunk are medium. And there's nobody who says, I wish you hadn't asked, which is on the far left, but there is still the low level of about 20%. I've seen it quite low. And at least 50% of firms, I said no partners have undergone at least 8 hours, and only about 10-20% have done more than, only about, get it right, 90% of firms is that the case, in sort of 10-20% of firms are at that 90% level. So if you're not doing the training, then don't be surprised if the literacy levels stay low. I suppose that's the message. So what are we going to do today? I wanted to talk you through an anonymous property poll I'm going to be asking you to do. We last did it about a year ago, a little bit more. And at that stage, people were being asked, what do you think is likely to happen post-COVID? I think we're kind of getting to the point now where people are beginning to get a feel for what post-COVID feels like. And we'll hear a bit more about that from some of our presenters today. But I thought it'd be quite interesting just to kind of do a benchmark and just find out, well, what is it that a year on, 15 months on, people still feel? It's exactly the same question. So if you did it then, sure you'll enjoy doing it now. But what are the what type of offices do you have? What's the typical cost of office space? And if you own the office, try and work, you probably know anyway from your internal accounts what the equivalent value would be if you were to hire it, if you were to lease it. So what's the typical cost? What sort of level of vacancies were normal pre-COVID? Again, if you don't have that information, then obviously you'll have to say that you're doing it other ways. But what typical level of desk vacancies pre-COVID? To what extent were people commuting pre and post-COVID? I think we kind of know what pre looked like, but again, I wanted to take the pre because I wanted to make sure that the two surveys are comparable. How much time are people spending commuting when they commute? What sort of office-related benefits are you putting in place pre-post? And this is probably the question that I'm sure the board will be coming back to, and the panelists today is, well, how can you sustain corporate culture in a world of hybrid workplaces? It's a really difficult question. I know a lot of people are grappling with it, and it's very unusual to see finance people talk about how can we improve the perceived value of the office and the impression we give people. And I say, why don't you talk to your marketing people? That's one of their areas of expertise. Oh, haven't thought of that. The traditional leased office is 85% of you, and the balance in service offices. There were a few other more exotic options which I gave you, but I don't think any of them really work as it happens. So let's move on to the second one. Is that going to change? Yeah, you've got nobody before, and now 15% of you, everybody working remotely. So there is a change there. So the traditional lease has dropped from 85% to 69%. So there you go. That's a change. In terms of how much is being paid, a few people working remotely. Some people say it's below £40 and some say it's over 160. So I don't think I can form any conclusions at all on that one. In terms of what was the typical desk vacancy, again, ignoring the people working remotely, the biggest chunk was, I guess, between, about 60% of you, somewhere in between 20 and 30%, something like a bit less than 20, but and then some smaller numbers. So offices on the whole were, and Chris would know more about this than I would, fairly busy places, I think I'd say, put it that way. In terms of pre-COVID, on average, what percentage of your people commuted on a full-time basis to your offices or to clients' premises? That was 15% of you, it was 100%. 38% said it was 95 to 100%. And then a few which sort of straggling down into the lower levels, but nobody was less than 75%. I think that's the key point. So everybody was more than 3/4 of the time, other than everyone working remotely was different. What are we looking at now? Well, again, it's sort of a bit hard to be specific, but the ones that come out strongest are around about 2.5 days to 3 days a week being in the office. How many days? And I put the question in, to what extent, how many days a week are your people choosing to commute to your office? I think a year ago I put requested. I think that's probably changed, hasn't it? But choosing to commute to your offices. And that, again, those numbers have, nobody's 5 days a week, nobody's 4.5 days a week, very few is 4. It's in much less. When people do come to the office, how long are they spending time to commute? And I appreciate that can be a regional issue, but the big chunk is 45 to 60 minutes. That I'm sure won't surprise you. And pre-COVID, what were the benefits? The one that came through strongest was a relaxed dress code, a wellness program on mentoring, and then a few others. Post-COVID, which of the benefits are you offering? Well, the wellness is still there. The relaxed dress code has gone up a bit from what it was before. The gym has fallen way back. No, so gym's about the same. Apologies, misread that one. But those are the up one. And then how does your firm, and this is kind of a nice segue into what we're going to start talking about next, but how does your firm intend to sustain its corporate culture in a world of hybrid workplaces? So 85% say regular updates from the leadership team. Just trying to do it something like order here. 69% organize regular social events at suitable external venues. Then we've got 62% lunch and learns. 54% encourage people to engage in community involvement, volunteering, that sort of thing. There are probably some other things that the panelists are going to come up with, but those seem to be the main things that people are doing. Buddy system isn't getting much. Company sports teams, not at all. Online lounges, not at all. I think everybody's kind of had enough online already, probably. Today's online, but I think this one has to be, given the reach of it. Anyway, I'll stop sharing now. And hopefully that's something that you've all had a chance to take on board. Thank you for completing it. And I will now remove the spotlight, and I will invite our first presenter to come and talk to us. And as I mentioned, that's Susie Pugsley, and she is the founder, managing director and consultant at PSBD, get that right? And she's talking about marketing and its contribution and how does that work. So over to you, Susie.
Thank you very much, Richard. Yes, I am honoured to come and talk to you all today. I am the founder, managing director and consultant of PSBD, which is a business development consultancy, which I founded after many years of being in-house for all the roles in marketing and business development in professional services, mainly law, and then ending up as a BD marketing director. And in my career, I was very lucky to sit on the board of a number of firms. And possibly why Richard asked me to come and talk today, one of my biggest bugbears is around having that voice of marketing and BD in the room where it happens. It is easier, to be fair, at the mid-market level, where it's sort of more agile, whereas the larger firms, there's a lot more layers and complexity, perhaps geographic issues. But I think it's very important for realizing that marketing is not an afterthought. I ran a campaign recently about it not being that postscript to what you're doing. And if anything the pandemic did for us was to bring or raise the capital of what more marketing brings to the table. In terms of, I had many partners phoning me afterwards where firms I've consulted going, thank goodness you've got us a CRM, because we'd have been stuffed if we hadn't had it. But getting that through had been a real mission. And I think really the advisory piece is very important. Whereas previously, perhaps that voice hadn't had the authority or the gravitas that it required. But I think it's also beholden on those marketing people, in their contribution to board level discussions, is to really understand the business. I've worked with senior level marketers who don't understand the financials, the profitability, the metrics, the pricing, and have to really upskill themselves to be in the right conversations. Similarly, working very closely, and it's a real bugbear of mine, but the lack of integration between the different business services or business support, depending on how your firm's budget, with HR, IT, finance, operations, facilities. You need those synergies, you need those conversations to be happening, and you need to be having them with authority at a very senior level for them to really trickle down and take effect. But be listening, and that's the key element of what's coming up. And that is what the pandemic has changed hugely for everyone, is really listening. And I think the marketing piece now is that advisory piece around what do clients want. We've all had persona programs, client journey mapping, experience, client relationship management programs that have been, used to greater or lesser success across the firms. But now people are bringing their real selves in a slightly funny way to work, and much more you're in people's homes. And marketing needs to be there informing what the needs and wants are of the customer base, rather than just saying, oh, you want to grow by X, let me go out and make that happen for you. Because the contract for having with clients is a different one, just as the contract with the board and its staff and its partners and everything else is also changing. What do people want out of their careers and their lives is no longer just motivated purely by finance. It's got to be culture. It's got to be, society, governance, all the ESG, campaigns getting far more traction than a dry legal update on social media. It's advising them on how they can connect more closely with the human beings that are their clients rather than the organizations that are their clients, and how they connect internally. And internal marketing has really risen like came to the top on this, because working closely with HR around internal communication, it is still astounding to me on the projects I work on where different parts of the business don't understand where the connectivity is between how we're going to take that to market, what is the proposition that we're going for here, and the folks similarly working with IT procurement. What are the tools we're needing? If we're going to buy in silos, we're not going to truly understand what we want. So working closely with HR on their performance thing also feeds into sector strategy, remuneration committees, all these things that marketing are an integral part of but don't get thought of immediately at board level decisions. But so internal communication of the integral nature, but also integrating marketing into that conversation is one of my clear things. So better understanding from the marketing piece of what goes on around the firm, and greater understanding and respect of what they bring to the table.
Thanks very much, Susie. That was great. And I love the point you made about internal marketing having become so important. I mean, if everybody is distributed around the place, everybody working remotely, if you don't get the communication agenda working, wow, you're in a really, really bad place. So we've heard from the world of marketing. Thank you, Susie. We're now going to talk about the world of HR, and in particular, how HR and technology might work better together in the softer areas. Delighted to welcome Devyani Vaishampayan, I think I've got that right, who's the managing partner of the HRTech partnership. Over to you, Devyani.
Thank you, Richard. So I think, as Susie said, things are changing quite fast, and the pandemic clearly has accelerated the use of technology. Now, if you look at people management, probably what was in use before the pandemic was more around process volume kind of work. So I would call it as automation, whether it is screening CVs, responding to them, or payroll, etc. The pandemic shifted things quite a bit because people suddenly got not just familiar but very used to online team meetings, face to face. And now post pandemic, I think there's a real rethink happening, particularly because a hybrid workplace is no longer an exception. And we've just seen from the polls right now that every organization has to start preparing for a hybrid workplace. And it's not just about how many days in the office and working from home. I think smarter organizations, strategic business leaders realize there is a real opportunity here. But also, to make it work, you have to completely rethink how people management now has to be managed. And there are two big fundamental changes that are now happening. The first is, it was always assumed that the softer aspects, whether it's feedback, coaching, mentoring, just being together, all had to happen face to face. Now, while that's ideal, given that most people will be in office 2 or 3 days a week, the probability of that happening when everyone's together is going to be quite low. And so I think a lot of business leaders are rethinking to say, in the first instance, how do we do some of these things virtually? And then, of course, the human interaction is then has to step in, but the first port of call has to be doing things in a more virtual way. I think the second big fundamental shift that's happening is employees' expectations of flexibility. It's not just about working from home, but I think what they're increasingly expecting is, let's say, training. It's no longer you have to be all together in a classroom at the same time with the same approach being adopted. This is just a simple example, but a new recruit, onboarding, a lot of these employees are now expecting to do it in their own way, in their own time, and not necessarily being present in the office. So I think organizations, HR leaders who realizing this big shift are now looking at the use of technology in a very different way. Now, we run AI Digital Human Capital Innovation Hub. Now, what it simply does is we have a portfolio of a couple of hundred AI solutions that can help organizations around leadership, culture, employee engagement, well-being, D&I, etc. And I think what we're seeing is a big increase of interest around three specific areas. The first, which I think even the poll kind of covered, is how do you sustain the organization? How do you keep employee engagement alive and kicking? How do you embed a culture that was very reliant on people being together in a physical space? And I think, Richard, I think you know, what your poll showed is probably a few options, but there are actually some very, really, really good AI digital solutions that can help employees. When I say engage, I think we are all familiar with using WhatsApp technology, and that's informal communication, which used to happen at the water cooler in the office. So solutions that can help embed that is really a big area. The second big area is leadership capability. How do you support coaching, mentoring, feedback? And again, some great solutions in that space. And the final one is D&I. I think a big issue facing all organizations, how do you create a diverse and inclusive culture? So those are the three primary areas we're seeing organizations look quite seriously about adopting AI digital solutions, which really have three key benefits. One is the whole predictive nature of the analytics. The second is the ease of use, but most importantly, it engages employees. It allows them to do it in their own personalized way. So that's my take on the use of AI at the workplace over the next couple of years.
Thanks very much, Devyani. That was, again, as always, fascinating. And I think it's a lovely segue into mentorship, of course, because one of the areas that you were helping us with there was saying that actually, you know, it used to be the idea that mentoring could only take place face to face, but now actually, of course, people have realized that that isn't the only way that people, in fact, often, because people in the office are very busy, they actually therefore prefer to do it online. I've even had somebody recently who said to me that actually a candidate told them they would prefer to be interviewed online rather than a face-to-face interview for a new job, which I hadn't heard before. So things change, don't they? So Jonathan, I'm now going to ask Jonathan Macfarlane, who is director of the Professional Career Partnership. And he spends a lot of time, as you would imagine, talking to employees, to partners, to people in frontline roles, people in business management roles across professional services, and very much looking at not just their careers, but also their attitudes. And I'm really interested to hear what he has to say in terms of his kind of take as to what's going on at the moment. Over to you, sir.
Thanks, Richard, and good morning, everybody. Very nice to be with you, albeit in this slightly disembodied form. Expectations. Expectations by their essence almost are unclear, and they change and they vary over time. And of course, we've had some huge changes taking place in all our worlds recently that has had the effect of further tweaking what people expect of each other. I think that's the other thing to say about expectations, is that they are mutual. In a perfect world, checking out on and managing and attending to expectations should be a two-way street. I.e. both the leader, the boss, and the employer need to play their part in it. I had a fascinating story a few years ago about somebody who'd been appointed as a new leader of a team, and they were really pleased with themselves to have called a team meeting, called everyone into the meeting, set out very clearly to them what their expectations were, then folded over their papers and said, right, that's it. To which somebody very sensibly from the team said, wouldn't you like to know what we expect of you? And that sort of gave rise to some slight embarrassment, and then in the end, quite a healthy conversation. So expectations are two-way streets. I think the other thing I've noticed in thinking about this conversation with you all is that from the point of view of many employees, they see what they expect of their leaders at kind of two levels. There is the figurehead boss, what I might call the chair, the managing partner, whoever it is, and the scene setting, the vision setting, the sort of waving the flag from the top of the hill, if you like, type of leadership. And then just as importantly, possibly most of the time more importantly, is the person they actually work with, the person they report to, their more day-to-day or week-by-week boss, and what they get from that person. But particularly in that latter case, there's regularity of checking out, and it fits in, of course, so clearly with Richard's idea of these sessions, which is, you know, retune, have a pit stop and think, look at whether the tires are full and the petrol tank's got enough in it, and then rush back out onto the track the race, as it were, of delivering work, as I see it. So you need to stop and look at this quite regularly. And I think in a perfect world, where you get to is a decent two-way exchange, whether as part of the regular one-to-ones that take place in lots of organizations or as whatever else. How am I doing? How are you doing? Are we giving each other what we want? There's a ton of research material about this. The psychological contract got invented, gosh, even when I was a boy, so a long time ago now. The idea of the iceberg of psychological contracts and what you can see and what you can't. The point about these expectations, as I say, is not only do they change, but they're often very unclear. They're often not even stated out loud. They're implicit. They grow over time and they change. But if you get them wrong, and you disappoint people or you mismanage expectations, then that's where high staff turnover, people leaving, lots of the people I talk to who are in the process of moving will be talking not about the headline terms of the contract they had with the place they used to work, but the fact that they just didn't get looked after. They didn't feel treated as a sensible human being. They weren't respected and so on. So coming on to what have I come across and seen as perhaps the top five expectations, and I'm thinking predominantly now of the employee and their immediate boss. What are the top five? The list could go on forever, but the first one I think is about trust. It's being trustworthy, if you like, that's consistent in the way you deal with people. And of course, buried in there in a big way is honesty. And honesty works in two ways. It's both being honest about what can happen and really critically honest about what can't happen. So I think people don't mind being told no, as long as they're told no in a straightforward and clear way. I think when people fudge this stuff, it's when it very often goes more badly wrong. Then our favorite, respecting other people in the team, seeing the value they have in them, giving them a sense that the other people see that they have a value in them. There's a big piece around providing feedback, development opportunities, particularly I think amongst younger people earlier in their careers. They want to learn, they want to grow, they want to change, they want the opportunity to progress. There's another really important area which I've called accessibility, which the flip side of which I think is not hiding. Yeah, the boss that you can get hold of, that you can talk to when you need and actually is around and a bit available, hugely valued by comparison with the one who ducks it a bit. And the last one, which I think is a relatively recent addition to the list, is I'm going to call kindness. And I just think it wraps up a whole lot of things around empathy, some of the things that we've already talked about, but just thinking about people as people. There was somebody I worked with recently who reckoned that their career in their firm had been severely limited over a long period because on one occasion, many years ago, they'd said, I'm sorry, I need to go home to bath my children because my wife's ill, my mother-in-law's fallen downstairs, all our usual systems are out of place, I need to do it, I'll be back in touch with everybody in 2 hours' time. And that got brought up year after year after year in his sort of promotion discussions and possibility of further advancement. And it may sound very out of date to us all now in this post-COVID world, but believe you me, it was thought, he felt, they just don't get me, they're not treating you as a human being, and he left. And is now a very successful managing partner of another very big firm.
Now, the next one of my final panelists today is Chris Blythe. And Chris is, as I mentioned before, a serial, I think that's almost the right word, but anyway, non-exec chairman, non-exec director after a very distinguished career in a professional body where he was the chief executive, and that was involved in property and construction. So he kind of knows a lot about the sector. But I thought, let's not just focus on the people agenda. Let's not just focus on the marketing agenda, but let's actually also reflect on the property agenda, because at the end of the day, hybrid working is essentially a property conversation as much as anything else in terms of usage of your property if it's not going to be used by your people. So over to you, Chris.
It's not about Chinese developers offloading their portfolios in Nine Elms at eye-watering losses. And I really have to pick up on the Building Safety Act that received royal assent last week. The Building Safety Act came as a response to the Grenfell Tower tragedy where 72 people died. It was followed up by a report by Dame Judith Hackett, who found some systemic failings in the construction industry. And following on from the look at cladding, there was also discovered major quality issues around the quality of recently built high-risk residential and other high-risk buildings. The end result is a lot of buildings have been deemed unsafe with respect to fire safety. Now, unfortunately, until that remediation is done, getting mortgage on such flats is sort of near impossible and making them unsellable. You probably know people in that position. You'll probably may even be a victim yourself. And under typical leasehold contracts, leaseholders are responsible for all the costs that arise, whether it's interim mitigation, such as working watch, increased insurance premiums, and of course, the remediation costs themselves. And these have been eye-watering, and it's caused an immense amount of stress and anxiety for people. And again, particularly a lot of people in this group are young professionals whose careers have been threatened with bankruptcy. So this is a calamity, and people were just guilty of buying a leasehold flat. So real human stories around this, and it's not just a technical issue around building safety. And there are hundreds of thousands of people caught up in this, looking for a clear way forward. Now, the Building Safety Act 2022 reverses the last 40 years of deregulation, and it's a bit of a monster. And there are a couple of features around it. The biggest is a new building safety regulator operating under the Health and Safety Executive. And any developer will have to satisfy this regulator before construction can commence. There's a few things that they're responsible for: mandatory registration of building inspectors and building control approvers, as well as all buildings, occupied high-risk buildings being registered with the building safety regulator as well. One of the big problems has been that nobody knows what's being built and what the building stock is. And also the regulator is going to be responsible for ensuring that the industry is competent to do its job. It may seem strange, but that's the state of the construction industry at the moment. Another element of regulation is a consumer products regulator with the power to remove products from the market. And the third is a new home ombudsman, which all house builders will have to join to build homes. So they are some of the key elements that will affect the industry. The legislation also sought to provide a series of protections for leaseholders and home buyers, including a retrospective right to sue developers for defective works up to 30 years after a home is completed, which is quite something. There are other measures to shield leaseholders as well, including making developers and cladding manufacturers pay for the brunt of the costs that are coming up. And where they don't have funds, or the liability passes to the building owner. Regrettably, a lot of the relief is only available to buildings over 11 metres high. And also, if leaseholders have already paid to have their buildings fixed, they won't get any money back, nor will buy-to-let leaseholders with more than 3 properties. So what the government has come out with is not perfect. And I'm sure, in a couple of Parliament's time, that will all change. So in addition to making builders pay for their own faults, they're also raising funds through a building safety levy and a property developers tax, which should help cover some of the orphan buildings where there's no one to chase up with the leaseholder. So along with this, the new home ombudsman extending the period to make claims from 6 years to 15 years. It's going to have a substantial change on the construction industry and how it will operate in the future, whether it's from the boardroom all the way down to the site. And even devices used to limit liability, such as special purpose vehicles for developments, won't provide that protection in the future, because there'll always be a route back to the eventual owners, the holding companies and what have you. And I think it's fair to say that, the government have really, got their eye on making sure that construction does things well. The reason we build is simple. We build to improve the quality of life. Construction and property sector has clearly failed in doing that. And I hope the Building Safety Act should raise the bar in terms of future performance for the industry. And the level of regulation, I think, reflects the historical breach of trust, although the Act does fall short in providing a complete resolution for those leaseholders caught up in this. It's going to take years to put this right. Probably over a decade. Lives will stay on hold till things get done. The construction industry will complain, quibble at every chance they get and say how unfair it is. But just remember this isn't a quick fix, and it's 4 years and 11 months since the Grenfell fire when 72 people died.
Thank you very much, Chris, for that really fantastic run through as to what's going on. And if you just sign a lease, be aware that things may have changed a bit from what was there before. I suppose is one simple takeaway, but you clearly need to talk to experts like Chris if you really want to understand some of the implications involved. So let's now turn to the panel session, and really picking up Susie, I'd just like to explore this internal communication area that you kind of picked on just towards the end of your talk, and tell us a little bit more about where marketing people have been taking the brunt of the effort in terms of internal comms from your perspective.
Absolutely, and internal comms can often, nobody wants to take responsibility, and everybody wants to take responsibility. So I used to say to our IT department who wanted to build this fabulous intranet, and I'm going, just because you get to build the car doesn't mean you get to drive it. And that's the thing about marketing and HR and IT working seamlessly together on internal comms, because what are you trying to understand? I would say if you don't have your own house in order, if you don't truly understand the function and role, the different services you're providing, how you're providing it, communicating it, and all the different platforms, then how can you go out and sell? God forbid we use the word sell to our potential clients about what we actually do if we don't know ourselves. And I've worked with a number of firms, large and small, where this is way before the pandemic. And it's got better afterwards because everyone had to go online to find information, but usually they wouldn't go to the intranet or they wouldn't come up to the town halls because, why would they bother? They were sat at their desk. But when you're sat alone at home and you need that connection, it has helped, change or move the dial on it, but still understanding the different, ways people consume information and the way people respond to it and how you're going to bring your business with you. And with this, as Devyani said, we've got so much of a war on talent. Culture piece around the internal marketing of what we do is so important.
Perhaps picking up Devyani now, and again, thank you again for your thoughts on the role of HR and also how HR and technology could be working together. I mean, can you give us a case study of an example where that a particular area where you've seen that work effectively?
So I think I'd like to pick up on what Susie just said, because that is really, as I said, we see that as a very common area. Now, technology has been used in the past. As I said, the internet has been there, and obviously surveys have happened, but all that assumes that the employee will approach when they need to, but also the information is very static. As consumers, I think we're all used to a very different outlook. We're used to things being sent to us. It figures out, for example, the moment you go onto a website, I think it figures out your areas of interest. It'll send you the relevant information. It'll send you adjacent things. That's the kind of mindset now, particularly younger people are very used to. And yet as employees inside an organization, they're treated as a little bit of idiots for whom things are being pushed at. So I think where technology, just to give an example, is I think this technology that can scan all the communication available and can help you understand, is there real collaboration happening? How engaged are people? Now, this is not about monitoring. This is not about individual employees, because I know the traditionalists might jump in and say, ooh, this is like, your individual privacy is being compromised. It's not that. What it does is it really helps senior managements get the pulse on an ongoing real-time basis, but also without having to wait for employees to tell them. And very often employees don't often tell them what's really on their minds. So I think the use of technology to be proactive, to figure out the issues that are happening, and therefore for management, therefore to understand and then be seen as really someone who empathizes and is willing to help. And I think Jonathan spoke about trust. All this really helps build up trust. If done the right way, if done to really support employees, it can help build up trust. And we've seen when organizations do that very well.
Thank you. And Jonathan, again, great segue there into trust, which we could explore a little bit more. But I didn't want to, I certainly, again, would love to hear your Ukraine story. So please regale us with that.
Okay. Well, it's an interesting one to think that one doesn't always know what people are expecting of you. And the invasion of Ukraine, in a number of firms I was working in, was something that a number of people minded about a great deal. And they found in some cases, lack of response or the somewhat equivocal initial responses on the part of one or two of their leadership groups very, very unsettling, and gave rise to levels of disconnect with the organization, which is something what clearly was trying to avoid, at a level that was really very surprising. And when it took time for a firm to, if you like, get its ducks in a row and make a firm statement, rather than stop and think in terms of how they reacted to the crisis, what does this mean for our business, which of our clients are going to be affected, what business will we lose? That was very much the experience I had of how a lot of management teams were looking at the invasion and the inevitable separation of Russia from the West that was about to take place. Whereas actually what some people within the firms were looking for from the leadership was a clearer statement. Equally, there were others who said, I don't think it is the role of my firm's management, if you like, to comment on major geopolitical issues. But it just only showed, I think, what a minefield this area of employee expectations is, and the fact that you have to keep your finger, as Deb was just saying, very closely on the pulse. And sometimes, well, events will move too fast for you. But the message, I think, was clear that being thoughtful and sensitive about the human reaction of people to things, both within the firm and out there in the wider world, is something that people often look for. And management should bear in mind. It's a different world. I mean, the Black Lives Matter issue was another example of this, where it took some people a while to pick up on the implications that was having and the effect it was having on their people. And I think those two issues, particularly in the last year or two, have brought into one's consciousness a different approach to what are employees expecting from their firms and their leaders.
Yeah, and I suppose another interesting example would be Florida, where the employees of Disney were very upset about certain things that the DeSantis, the governor, were doing. And after doing nothing, the leadership of Disney then sort of jumped on it, well, then started pushing it, only to be told that they were going to have all their legal rights to do what they wanted in their own space removed by him because he didn't like what they were doing. So it's an interesting one, whether the leader should always follow what their employees are telling them, or do you, going back to your honesty, do you just say, sorry, this is just too difficult, and explain why? Chris, do you have any thoughts on that at all?
I think trust, is vital in this, and I take the point that Jonathan was making, and if I just sort of slip back to the points I was making, I think there's a lot of people who are struggling at the moment in these flats and apartments, which they have the leasehold problems in. I just wonder how much notice employers have of it and understand the issues going on. It's very easy when you're sitting in, your study at home in your house with a garden and everything, to not really comprehend how miserable it can be for people who are required to work from home in a flat which is deemed unsafe, but they'd like to go in the office but they find it expensive to commute because they have to pay £400-500 a month for working watch. There are whole sorts of things there which I think there's a real challenge for employers there, and I think to build the trust and relationships with employees, I think they need to get behind that, because there are literally hundreds of thousands and a lot of them are young professionals. So yeah, I think all the points that are being made, I think, are just as valid.
Thanks. And I might just bring Devyani in on that. I mean, this is the whole point about knowing that your employees are in a bad place. Not everybody likes to sort of let people know that they're struggling in that way. I mean, how, from an HR point of view, how would you approach that challenge of making sure management knew which employees might be struggling in that particular way of living in a Grenfell flat, if I can use that term?
Well, I think anyway, mental health is really a big, a key focus area, and the issue of mental health has become far more important since the pandemic, isolation, etc. Again, I go back to, I think you made a very relevant point. A lot of employees don't want to approach the organization for help directly because it is embarrassing. They're not sure how it would be received. So again, a great example of a solution that we've seen very popular is an app that can do three things. It can help assessment at an individual level. So as an individual, you can just keep track, you can look at benchmarks. Most importantly, it can then direct you to some resources online. And again, it's not about Googling through tons of data. It has got very high caliber quality information which would suit the employee on the topic they're looking for, and that's done in an easy way. And then if need be, it can also connect you to an actual therapist, which can help the employee have a very discreet confidential information. Now this is just one single example, but effectively what it does is it gives freedom and flexibility to the employee to address their own issues but feel they're supported. And then of course the organization also has some ongoing insight about how many employees are using it, what kind of issues are they approaching, taking support on, and that can help them decide what else they need to do to support employees in which particular areas. So it's a far more targeted, specific, intelligent way of approaching it, rather than generically saying, oh, I think, this is the next area and everyone may be interested in it, which may not be the case. So I think, again, with limited budgets, limited time, leadership teams are beginning to look at a far more focused approach, but doing things that are very personalized to an employee. And wellness clearly and mental health is a big part of that.
Fantastic. And I think, unfortunately, we're in the final minute of the day, which is, gosh, that didn't time go quickly when you're having fun. So I'll switch to gallery view. What I'd like to do, just quickly go around and ask each of you just to give me one idea that you picked up today that you think is helpful and valuable to you. And we'll start off with Susie, just to put you on the spot.
Oh, I knew you'd come to me. I think, one of the things I picked up, which isn't new, but it just is always good to be reminded of it, is that trust equation between the board and the employee. And I think particularly when we talk about that corporate, property issue, it's having that in the back of the mind of what's going on with people at home and what they're bringing.
Jonathan, what's your takeaway from today?
I think a lot of this builds into what I have recently learned to hear about as the employee brand. And I think both Susie and Dev have helpfully made us think about things that could be used to improve that by using marketing and using some technology to support what I think is the key effort, which is actually the one-to-one behaviour of leaders and bosses. And if anyone could get them to behave the way you'd like them to, all sorts of things would be solved. But that's too difficult. So we need props and help from people like you guys. So thank you.
Chris, what's your one takeaway from today?
I think is to remember that technology is an aid. It's not always the solution. And you've got to put people first. And you can lay some stuff off to technology, but not everything.
And Devyani, finishing up with you, what's your takeaway?
Well, I think, you really need an integrated approach. So gone are the days when each function operated in silos. Look at the issue, and whether it's HR, marketing, IT, business leaders, I think the more you can take an integrated view of, you're likely to really address the issue in its fullest form.
Well, I'm afraid we've definitely run out of time now. 1 minute over. My apologies for those who are clock watching. But I'd like to thank today's panel. I'd like to thank Susie. I'd like to thank Chris. I would like to thank Devyani, and of course, obviously Jonathan. And no, I didn't mean to guillotine you, my friend. Never my style. But thank you all for making a great panel session today. We managed to have solved all the problems of the world, but I think we've all come up with some great ideas, which hopefully the listeners can pick up, not just from today in the studio audience, but also the hundreds, if not thousands, of people who watch these videos that we're making. So thanks again, everybody, and I'll be back in 2 weeks with a new panel. Bye for now.